3 years later, at the beginning of September 1951, Molokov and I rode 3 horses to the Abakan cordon with another detour. At the same time, we brought food for the winter watch. According to the plan, we were to spend 5 or 6 days at the cordon. It was necessary to visit the hot spring and prepare the cordon for winter. Upon completion of this work, Molokov remained on duty, and I, taking all the horses, had to return to the village. Zwickav, an employee of the reserve, was at the spring at the time. He also remained on duty with Molokov. They planned to return to the village on skis. We completed all the work on time, went fishing a little, and I, now with 4 horses, set off. I had to drive alone through the mountain taiga, cross the Abakan ridge. This is at least 2 days. The road is familiar, but the day before departure a cold rain fell, and snow fell in the mountains. As I climbed up to the pass, the snow became more and more, and at the pass it was, as the taiga people say, up to the belly of a horse. The trail was not visible, the trees were covered with snow. A little boozy. In this situation, when the visibility is 20-30 meters, it is difficult to navigate. All hope is in horses. I knew that a horse, having been somewhere in the taiga at least once, would never go astray. And our horses knew this path better than we did, and they always go home cheerfully in a hurry, and there is no need to urge them on. And when I saw the mailbox nailed to the tree, everything fell into place. It was the top of the pass. The mailbox was established by observers to transmit information back in the 30s. After descending from the pass, I fed the horses and continued on an almost dry path. Returning to the village, I reported in detail about the trip. Usually we reported orally in the scientific department, and this time our conversation took place in Shaposhnikov's office, who, during the conversation, smiling, suddenly asked, "Well, don't you hear anything about the Lykovs?" And, developing the conversation, said that the decision had been made next year to send observers to find the Lykovs and resettle them, if they wish, to the reserve cordon, where he was invited before the war, or, in case of refusal, to help them get to where they wish. And help to settle down in a new place. He also said that there is an agreement on assistance to the Lykovs at all levels of government. Unfortunately, this conversation remained a conversation. Life again made its unpredictable adjustments. A few days later, an order came from the head office to dismiss Director Efremov from his post, which was a pattern, and a few days later, like a bolt from the blue, an order came to liquidate the reserve, on the basis of the resolution of the Council of Ministers of the USSR. This side of the life of the reserve, which echoed in the fate of the Lykov family, should be specially mentioned. The very fact of the liquidation of the reserve was some kind of incomprehensible, ominous phenomenon. Such a terrible blow to nature, which was inflicted on the reserves of the USSR, has never happened anywhere else. In essence, it was a stab in the back of nature itself, as a result of which we all exist. Not only Altai was liquidated. Out of 128 reserves, 100 were eliminated. In addition to Altai, one of the largest reserves, Syansky, was also liquidated. Thus, on the vast territory of the Altai-Syan taiga upland, almost not a single meter of the protected area remains. And this is the center where the best cedar forests in the world grow. The scientific world was at a loss. How could this happen? Why is it, suddenly, take and destroy everything that has been done over the years? Interesting long-term observations of nature, scientific works, expedition diaries, etc., at best, went to gather dust in the archives. The role of nature reserves in the conservation of nature, restoration of the number of many species of mammals and birds, in the preservation of the most valuable medicinal plants was well known, and there was no need to prove the most important role of nature reserves. It was a truth that does not require proof. However, the government, regardless of anyone or anything, single-handedly decided and with one stroke of the pen destroyed what Russia was proud of, showing the whole world its ignorance, lack of understanding of simple things and short-sightedness. It turned out so, what I want, I turn. And the glory of Russia in terms of conservation and protection of nature faded. The head of state signed a decree on the liquidation of reserves. But a holy place is never empty, and timber merchants rush to these richest taiga spaces, where mainly cedar grows. Already in 1952, the largest timber industry enterprise began to operate on Lake Teleksi. But this was not only preceded by the liquidation of the reserve. In 1937, the centuries-old veto on cedar felling was lifted. The tree, which throughout the entire existence of Russia was under a categorical ban in terms of its felling, was allowed to cut down, and throughout Siberia. The cedar was not guarded in vain. This is the only fruit-bearing tree in Siberia that bears wonderful fruits in the form of nuts. Almost all animals and birds living in the taiga eat nuts. And it was in such parts of the taiga that there was an abundance of valuable fur animals, and their reserves did not dry up, although for centuries the main commodity in the world market was furs. But the Altai Reserve is not only a cedar, it is a complex of untouched nature and a unique and rare Teleksi Lake, the second largest storage of high-quality fresh water in Siberia after Lake Baikal. After receiving a resolution to liquidate the reserve, a general meeting of the team was held and preparations began for the delivery of property and equipment. They sent messengers to the Abokan cordon, who, like in 1941, removed the attendants, all they could, cleaned up and left the cordon, now forever. Looking ahead, it should be said that after many years of ordeals, the main directorate for reserves managed to prove the need to restore the reserve in Altai, and in 1958 the reserve was restored, but its area was significantly reduced. The Abokan site, where the Lykovs lived, did not enter its territory. Kranitsky was appointed director, a business-like, knowledgeable specialist who in a short time restored traditions, gathered a team of young scientists, and the work began to enter a normal business course. And it seemed that wisdom had finally triumphed. However, the next head of state in 1961, making another report on the situation in the country, said, speaking about reserves, the following: "Reserves, in my opinion, are a far-fetched business." The next day, the Altai Regional Executive Committee made a decision to liquidate the reserve. And again they buried a wise noble deed, showing the whole world their ignorance. What could serve as the basis for such an illiterate statement, who could convince that we do not need nature, is difficult to say. One thing is clear, that the timber merchants were able to convince the government that cutting down the forest is more economically profitable than protecting nature, without thinking that by cutting down the cedar we are destroying the most valuable animals, birds, and a wonderful food product. In 1968, the government finally took a closer look at nature conservation issues, and the Altai Nature Reserve was restored. But the Abokan section was not included this time either. But let us return to the Abokan cordon, where two attendants remained, and trace the actions of the observer Molokov. Among the various kinds of tasks there was such. They had to climb up the river, as far as possible, in order to explore this part of the reserve. In the first days of duty, as soon as the weather improved, Molokov left his partner at the cordon, and he himself went on a pole up the river in a boat. Left alone. He thought it would be better this way. And the cordon has not been abandoned, and no one dares to penetrate up the valley, knowing that the guard is on the cordon. For such a taiga inhabitant as Molokov, loneliness in the taiga in such conditions did not pose any difficulties. I mean that experienced taiga people do not experience any inconvenience from loneliness, they calculate every step forward, weigh the pros and cons, and are always ready for any surprises. He managed to climb quite high, despite the formation of a hole on the river, which forced Molokov to drag the boat along the bank. I must say that Molokov and I have overcome this obstacle more than once, but now he was alone. On the third day, he left the boat in a convenient place and decided to walk a little longer up the valley. After about a kilometer of the way, I found a fence and two faces in the channel. For him, there was no doubt that there was no one to fish here except Lykov. He carefully examined the place and left, trying not to leave any traces. And the next day the meeting took place. Karp was shaking the grayling out of his face when he saw a man walking towards him. Molokov approached slowly. The carbine was behind him. He did this on purpose, as if to show that he had no bad intentions, but Lykov did not show any fuss either. He stood calmly, crossed himself, barely perceptibly moved his lips, and at the same time carefully examined the newcomer. The same thing that happened in these places 11 years ago was repeated, with which I began my story. Coming closer, Molokov greeted and asked, "Recognized me?" Lykov, bowing, responded to the greeting and said, "I have admitted, Danila, I have." This is how the next meeting with a man from the world took place, and again with Molokov. This time we talked thoroughly. Molokov himself said. He scolded Lykov hard, and not for hiding from people, but for hiding children. He persuaded in every possible way, as he could. It was easy for Molokov to talk to Lykov. These people were not only co-religionists, but also knew each other for many years of their lives. He also asked about our letter, which we had left in his house on Erinath in February 1947. "Have you read it?" Lykov replied, "We did, but not everyone understood. Although there was nothing to puzzle over there. As I already wrote, we set out everything in that letter as simply as possible, there is nowhere more intelligible." This was, in my opinion, a primitive trick on Lykov's part. Citing misunderstanding, it is easier to evade responsibility. When asked how is the family, how is everyone's health, how are children, Lykov said, "Kazinka and the kids, thank God, are alive." From the conversation, Molokov realized that Lykov was afraid to leave the taiga, saying, "They will grab you and you will perish." Danila Makarovich convinced that the hot wartime was gone, and now there is no longer what it was, and that no one would touch them. In a word, the conversation took place, and again Molokov spoke in detail about the work in the reserve at the Abokan cordon, and, as if on behalf of the administration, promised, in case of consent, to drive a cow and sheep into their personal use. We parted rather amicably, and it could not be otherwise. They had nothing to share. Both understood that no one threatened anyone and that such important issues should be resolved not with dashing, but with peace and respect. In addition, it should be noted that time reconciles, and vicious attacks on Lykov from local residents and belligerent officials from the government by this time gradually subsided. Molokov advised not to look for another place of residence anymore and added that if they left, they would still find it, and then there could be serious troubles. We spent several hours together. Parting, Karp Lykov gave Molokov some grayling for fish soup, and Danila Makarovich, in turn, shared the salt. Having said goodbye, they parted, not knowing that in this world they were not destined to meet. All this Molokov told when he returned from duty at the Abokan cordon of the no longer existing reserve. And now is the time to say that since 1951 the Lykovs have been left without any attention. There was no one to think about them. The researchers left, the locals had no time for them, and no one showed any agility, their worries, more than enough. The local authorities did not even need the Lykovs. The place where they lived was the territory of the Krasnoyarsk territory, and their few knew that someone was living somewhere, and if there were any rumors about the forest people, they were perceived as a beautiful legend. Moreover, the Lykovs never did any harm to anyone, did not interfere with anyone, did not climb into someone else's life and did not demand anything from anyone. In the newly created reserve, as I already wrote, the Abokan site did not enter this time either, and the Lykovs have now finally become no one, and they gradually began to be forgotten. Please share this video on your social networks, using the buttons under the video and subscribe to the channel. I ask you to go and watch other videos about Agafia Lykova, which you can see now on the screen in the end screensavers. There are a lot of rare and interesting facts about the Hermit. Thank you all for watching.